I think to make the case that people's vibes are just now they are kind of willy-nilly in general, I know on a lot of things, but when they talk about the economy, especially if you ask them questions like, what are my odds of getting a job in 6 months if I were to lose it now? They generally track performance of real things. It's not completely disconnected gibberish. It tracks actual recessions, actual bad economic feelings, actual slowdowns. Again, we're having rising bankruptcies. We're having rising default rates. These things aren't made up. I think it's frustrating to call it vibes. I crashed out on someone on Twitter recently. Actually,
I saw that.
I crashed out because it's like, bro, I think it's like spitting in someone's face, telling them it's totally vibes based. Not that there aren't Gen Z doing well. Some people clearly are. I think we have a real divergence.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah,
okay. Setting CPI and inflation aside.
Okay.
So as we're doing all this research, one of the things is, again, people keep coming to this graph. Younger generations are richer than their parents. And one of the things that Derek brought up was like, oh, well, in the last 5 years, and we've all heard about this, more people are investing in the stock market than ever before. The GameStop craze and the crypto craze and all this has made far more people, the average person, invest into the stock market earlier than they did before. Whereas in the past, that used to be kind of an old person's game. You'd spend the first couple decades, you buy a house, later decades in your life, you invest in stocks. And so imagine that you're somebody in Gen Z or a millennial who started investing in the stock market in the last 5 years. I'm in that category, right? Once I had saving money in whatever it was, I was, when I was 30 or something like that, I started putting my money into the S&P 500. S&P 500, the giant index most people invest into. If you look at the history of the S&P 500, which you could very roughly correlate with where people are putting their savings, from September of 2000, it was $1,500 to buy one, what's it called, stock in S&P 500?
Like a unit, I guess.
One unit in the S&P 500.
1 gram of the S&P 500.
Give me a gram. Show up to
So
Wall
if
Street,
you-
itch it, fiending.
If you do a line of the S&P 500 back in 2000, you're talking 1,500 big ones, okay? And then 19 years later, in 2019, it finally doubles to $3,000. It took 19 years for it to double. It has doubled again in the last 5, excuse me. So the S&P 500, one of the main indices that people are investing into, has doubled at 4 times faster than it had in the past. This is an insane explosion of wealth. And so for people like me who put some money into the S&P 500 4 years ago, I'm like, oh, wow, holy shit. This is incredible. Stock markets are awesome. And there are probably many people in Gen Z and the millennial generation who've done that. And so when we look at these graphs of, oh, they're actually wealthier, this is going to account for that. It's going to fact that somebody's savings that they put into the stock market 5 years ago have fucking doubled. That's crazy.
The king did have this thought when he was looking at one of the other graphs, is that your barrier to entry, like it was comparing wealth of like the boomer generation at the same age, right? And it's so disproportionately lower. And so many of those, like when you go that far back, the bottom rung of the ladder to getting into a house was so much lower, right? So you had the ability to save your money and then buy a home, which wasn't necessarily skyrocketing in value for like much of the previous century, right? So your wealth that was primarily put into the home wasn't exploding. But now, for a lot of younger people, I'm imagining that what money you do have is nowhere near enough for a down payment on a home.
Yeah.
So you just put it into the stock market instead, and you happen to be investing at a time when there's record performances.
But then I think on top of that, you might have data on how many millennials and Gen Z invest in the stock market. Presumably, most don't still, right? Because of all the issues we're talking about.
I heard like investing, as in putting a small amount in, it's actually higher than ever. Like people are trying it a little bit
Right.
with
But
Robinhood.
not at like...
But like 90% of the total value of the assets in the stock market is owned by boomers. Like
Okay.
they own all of the value.
So
That's what I mean, but it's like somewhat reasonable, right? For somebody like in a pretty normal job, middle of the road, like you're 28, 29 years old, to maybe have like $10, $20, $30,000 in savings. It's pretty reasonable for that to be the case, right? And
30 grand, it seems like an outlier. That would be really high.
Yeah, but any amount in that range of like whether it be like a couple thousand versus like a 30,000 on the high end, right? Go back to this feeling that I told you guys about a while ago. I'm normal right now.
Oh, you look so normal.
Where when I had my previous job and I was making $60K a year, I had no conceivable path to owning a home. Like it wasn't even on my mind because there's no realistic timeline with the amount of money that I'm saving right now that I can even afford a down payment. But I was saving money and getting close to what I'm describing right now, and then thinking about putting it in something like the S&P. So I do think it makes sense. It's not that Gen Z have like this outsized portion of overall money put into it. They're not necessarily the reason that it's going up so much. But I do think it makes sense that for what portion of savings that you do have that will never, from your young person mind, will never translate into a home, at least not anytime soon, you may as well put it into this thing that happened to explode over this like 10-year period.
I think that's a really good point. I think that's why a lot of people in this argument, even people that were like, they're not as screwed as we think, they came back to housing because there's clearly something broke. I think there's more screwed.
Yeah.
You know, I'm on the side of a lot of things are screwed, but even most people can agree. There's a through line here, which is that housing has divorced itself. And again, can you pull the screen up, Perry? This is the crash up, but housing has so clearly divorced itself from income, even with increased incomes, that people, they use this excess money in a lot of weird different, like they're traveling more, like they're doing more things because they don't.
They meaning like boomers who have homes.
I'm talking about, no, even Gen Z. Gen Z is like, because they have this little nest egg that's not enough for a down payment.
Oh.
Rather than putting that down and starting to put down roots like their parents might have or their grandparents, they are making speculative bets on the stock market or crypto, or they're traveling more, or they're like, they are enjoying more purchases than the people that's that range.
They're buying Taylor Swift tickets.
Or they're buying Taylor Swift tickets.
Yeah.
But it's because they have given up. It's like, it's a hedonic spending because they have given up on the chance of getting a house.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. I feel like that's how I felt. I was like, I'm saving what I reasonably can. And I actually do feel like I have a lot of disposable income because the idea of saving for a house is just, it's not existent. There's no chance I will ever get there and something drastically changes about my income in life. So I may as well I can just spend it on fun things. I'll go travel. I'll do this with my friends. I'll buy the concert tickets. Like, you can do all that because it's not being put towards that greater goal because of how out of reach it is.
And I agree with that. I think just personally, that applies to the half that's doing better of Gen Z or whatever. Like the portion of Gen Z that like has found a stable, maybe white collar employment. And because there's a bigger group of people that can't get a job at all. And there is a rising youth unemployment, and there is more basic costs that are eating into that they're not even thinking about.
Yeah, that's my argument as well. So like for me, the S&P 500 explosion as an example, which is basically anybody who put money into the stock market, you would have seen it blow up over the past 5 years. But even with someone you're talking about, right, who's let's say 28, they had $10,000 saved up, they put it into the stock market, now it's $20,000. Like, that's great. That doesn't move the needle in any way, shape, or form. But then anybody who, let's say, has been working at Google for 5 years out and they've been making $200,000 a year and they could put 100 grand in and now they have 200.
They're crushing.
Right. And so I because this graph is like, oh, see, Gen Z and millennials have more money than anyone else. I think frankly, it's people like us three who have been very fortunate, where if you've been fortunate over the past 5 years, you've been really, it's fucking skyrocketing. And then everybody else is being farther left behind, but the average is being shot way the fuck up because I get the sense that this is indicative of severe wealth inequality within generations, right? And so
the king has heard that young millennial millionaires new record numbers of young millennial millionaires are being made every day.
Yeah,
record.
I bet these numbers about wealth look way, way worse if you actually separate it into income bands. Like, it's probably substantially more depressing. What I would think. Yeah.
And it's because I know it could be vibes, but it feels so crazy to think that everyone simultaneously is encountering these similar problems. I don't know.
Well, let's dig into housing. So like you said, what a lot